Hi, I'm Dave Trull with the Trull Gallery, and I'm going to show you how to cut angles with a table saw. And we can do that in a couple of different ways. We can angle the blade, or we can angle our miter gauge. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll start with the miter gauge, and a lot of people think, your miter gauge is going to be used at 90 degrees, but it doesn't have to be. You can turn it to whatever angle you need, and most miter gauges will give you a 45 to 45 degree swing on either side. One of the things I want to remind you of is that most miter gauges have numbers on the back that give you an approximation of what angle it's at. I wouldn't recommend trusting those angles because they're notoriously inaccurate. So if it's a specific angle you're looking for, make sure that you double check with an appropriate measurement gauge like a sliding T-bevel that you've previously set up. But for today's purposes, we're just going to show you how to make a quick cut. So we'll turn this to 45 degrees. What's important is to make sure that when you're making your cut, your stock doesn't move. If you can clamp it to your miter gauge, that will help stabilize it. The nice thing about this type of miter gauge is I can actually clamp it down to my bar and it won't allow it to slide. What happens a lot of times is when you're making angled cuts, the force of the saw pulls it, and despite the fact you've taken all the time to set it up accurately, it's going to kick it in a degree or so and you're not going to get a nice clean cut. So you can clamp it to your gauge one way or another, it'll give you a nice clean cut. We can go ahead and put on our safety equipment and make our cut. Because we've got our stock clamped to our gauge, we don't want to bring it back through while the blade is spinning, nor do we want to reach for the scrap. We want to make sure everything is stopped and safe before we bring our fingers close to the blade or our stock back through. So you can see we've got a nice clean cut at 45 degrees. All right, the next thing we're going to look at is cutting an angle by angling the blade. First thing we're going to do is take out our throat plate, and we're going to replace it with a throat plate that's used either for angles or for dado sets. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to set the angle of our blade. And I'm going to turn this to 45 degrees because that'll give you the best idea of the angle while we're working at it. Now that we've got our angle set, we need to check our blade height. And again, we just want to check to make sure we've got about a tooth above the material. Now we can go ahead and set our fence to the distance we need. Lock that in place. And we're ready to make our cut. Now, one thing I want to caution you on is with the blade leaning towards the fence, which you'll see in a lot of saws, especially older saws like this one, you just want to be careful because you're getting pressure of the blade against the fence. You just want to keep it in mind and make sure you keep constant pressure against the fence so your board doesn't slide into the blade. That will cause a kickback. I'm going to go ahead and put on our safety equipment, fire up the saw, and make our cut. Again, we go ahead and let the blade come to a complete stop before we pull our stock out. And you can see we've got a nice 45 degree angle on our material. So we've just showed you two different ways to make angle cuts on a table saw, with the miter gauge and by angling the blade. Both simple procedures, and you'll be using them time and time again on your projects around the home. I'm Dave Trull with the Trull Gallery, the fine art of furniture making.